It is a great pleasure and honor for me to introduce Dr. Karan Singh. We first met at the Bombay conference, which was an ITA conference called Ancient Wisdom and Modern Science, the meeting of people in the new paradigm science and spiritual teachers. And when we first met him, he came with the reputation of a brilliant speaker. And we were told that when he speaks in India, 1 million people will show up to hear his talks. And then when he gave the talk at the Bombay conference, we understood why. It was absolutely brilliant and interspersed with quotes from scriptures, from Indian scriptures, Sanskrit, and woven into a powerful message where actually it seemed that more was coming through than was even told. I mean, there was an element of a transmission that many of us experienced. Just to do justice to his biography and the different functions that he fulfills in the world would compete with his speech, though I just say a few words. Dr. Karan Singh was born as son of the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir and was heir apparent. And then when India became democratic, he was the first one who voluntarily gave his property to the Indian government, and he became involved in Indian politics and actually world politics in a very, very unique function. Some of them were more traditional, which is like being ambassador, Indian ambassador in the United States, but his other functions were more unconventional. He became like an ambassador of goodwill, somebody who was a bridge between India and the rest of the world, promoting human understanding. After the Bombay conference, then he came to several other of our conferences, and we have the great honor to call ourselves Dr. Karan Singh's friends, as much as admirers. About some of his other functions, he is president of Auroville, he's president of the Temple of Understanding, he's involved with UNESCO as part of the executive branch. And yet another important aspect of his life, he's a scholar, he's a Vedanta scholar, he's an Aurobindo scholar. He has an institute where lectures are given about Aurobindo and other aspects of Indian philosophy. Also president of the Council of Cultural Relations in India. So it's an enormous pleasure to introduce him, and for me, and I'm sure it's the same for Christina, this is definitely a highlight of this conference. And I understand that we will start with a short film which is based on Dr. Karan Singh's book, I Believe, when he expressed 12 visions for the future of humanity. So, again, this is Dr. Karan Singh.
I believe that man is still in an intermediate stage between the animal and the divine. It is still in a stage of evolution. And to be able to take part in that evolution, to be able to cooperate with that evolution, I think is probably the noblest thing that we can do in our lives. As we move up the evolutionary ladder, we finally come to the human race. And the human race for the first time is a race capable of being self-conscious. And then as we evolve through life after life, we ultimately get to the awareness that there is something within us that is indestructible and divine. There is a beautiful verse by Allama Iqbal, खुदी को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रज़ा क्या है. That खुदी की बुलंदी, raising the level of consciousness, which is really the goal of yoga, I believe that that is the greatest goal that we can have in our lives, and that is something which every human being should adopt. Shivoham, Shivoham, Shiva Swarupo. I think there is a lot of spiritual craving in the world today, despite what people talk about crass materialism and consumerism. That's all there. But there is a lot of craving. There are millions of people, I think, today around the world who are striving consciously to grow spiritually, despite all the disasters of our times. And I think that if we can have some kind of a networking of these groups, what I think now is, instead of a revelation coming in one major beam, like it used to come earlier, the great religions, you had one powerful beam, one person or one book or one sort of teaching. Now I rather look upon it as a series of points of light, sort of a lattice covering the world, as it were, with little points of light everywhere. Each individual who's striving represents a point of light in that network. And hopefully that network, the light, will ultimately grow strong enough to encompass the entire world. I believe that all religions, without any exception, represent various paths to the same divine goal. The Rig Veda has a marvelous phrase, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one, the wise call it by many names. You know, it seems to me to be self-evident. Who are we, denizens of a tiny speck of dust in this illimitable cosmos, to lay down that the immutable, illimitable divine can appear only at this time and in this place and in this form? I mean, it's prima facie unacceptable. How do we know there are billions and billions of galaxies? How do we know how many planets are inhabited? How do we know where the divine has descended in those planets? We have to realize that there are multiple paths to the divine. So the sooner we shed the idea that any religion or any individual or any church or any person has the sole selling rights of the divine, the better it will be for humanity. Religions have had a very mixed record. On the one hand, much that is great and noble in human civilization, art, architecture, music, dance, scriptures, literature, can be traced back to one or other of the great religions of the world. There's no doubt about it. On the other hand, ironically enough, more people have been killed and massacred and tortured and persecuted in the name of religion than in any other name. I think our path and our problem and our challenge in this century is to try and reinterpret the great religions of the world in such a manner that it brings about, it nurtures this divinity that I have mentioned. I believe that life is a mosaic of shadow and sunlight, of victory and defeat, of joy and sorrow, of Vijay and Parajay, of Sukh and Dukh. These dualities are built into the very texture of life. And I don't think there's anybody who's ever gone through life without experiencing these dualities. I believe that the way to deal with these dualities is to be aware of them and yet to be able in some ways to transcend them. That a certain inner detachment is necessary. Because these experiences are all part of our growth. And sometimes the unpleasant experiences are more important teachers even than the pleasant ones. That is the time when your inner metal is tested. And that is when your inner strength begins to grow. I believe that there is a divine destiny behind this whole human experience, behind life on this planet, behind the miracle of evolution. It couldn't be meaningless. We are participants in the adventure of consciousness, and therefore each one of us in our own lives, in our own activities, in our own attitudes, in our own sadhana, in our own quest, can make a contribution towards the evolution of consciousness in the cosmos. And that is why the most famous prayer that is echoed and re-echoed down the corridors of time in our culture has been, lead me from the unreal to the real, lead me from the darkness to the light, lead me from death to immortality. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam.
Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Spirituality in the global society. The first ITA president and my dear friends Stan Grof and Christina, the current ITA president Harris Friedman, the president-elect to whom we were introduced, members of the International Transpersonal Society, delegates to this significant conference from around the world, representatives of the press and electronic media, Namaste, Zdravstvuyte, good morning. Friends, we live in an age of tremendous turmoil and transition, with the old collapsing and the new struggling to be born, and we find ourselves precariously poised between a disappearing past and an indiscriminate future. The advances of science and technology have been truly extraordinary, including breaking of the space barrier by your Yuri Gagarin. I remember the first day the Sputnik went around the world with Yuri Gagarin in it. Space travel, instant communications, unraveling the human genome, the Large Hadron Collider, the internet, and all these great scientific developments that have taken place, that have transformed the texture of life on our planet before our very eyes. The inexorable pace of change appears to accelerate as we hurtle into the future astride the irreversible arrow of time. And yet the crisis faced by humanity is also deepening. The 20th century saw the end of colonialism, fascism, Marxism, Leninism, and also heralded the collapse of unrestricted capitalism. And globalization has emerged as the new watchword. But while globalization has certainly brought tremendous benefits in many fields, including trade, commerce, tourism, and international cultural exchanges, it also has its darker side. Pandemics, the abominable practice of human trafficking, arms smuggling, drug trafficking, and terrorism have assumed global dimensions. Clearly, if humanity is to survive in a global society that is sane, secure, and sustainable, the present hyper-consumerist, ultra-promiscuous, and super-materialistic lifestyle will have to yield way to a more holistic paradigm in which spirituality plays a pivotal role. I would like here to refer to the Earth Charter, which was released in 2000 AD, which is to my mind the most comprehensive articulation of ecological, social, interfaith, and life-affirming values ever attempted. And I would urge that it should be revisited at their website. Our present societal milieu impels us to reflect deeply on how the entire concept of spirituality needs to be re-articulated in the light of the paradigms of the emerging global society. In this exercise, the first point is the relationship between spirituality and the world's great religions. Until recently, both were considered to be closely interconnected, one flowing from the other. But of late, there is a growing view that religion, in fact, can sometimes have negative and exclusivist connotations, whereas spirituality transcends barriers of race and religion, sex and sexual preference, language and nationality, and is therefore best suited for the emerging global society. In my view, what we need is not a wholesale rejection of religion, but a reassertion of certain universal precepts that will enable us to cope with the challenges and hazards of globalization. As was mentioned by Harris Friedman, you have spirituality and religiosity. I look upon religiosity as our horizontal dimension of our lives, our interaction with society. Whereas I look upon spirituality as the vertical dimension of looking within ourselves, of trying to find that which is the deepest within ourselves. Many of these great precepts are to be found in humanity's great religious traditions, but they need to be rediscovered, renewed, and reaffirmed in the contemporary context. I will attempt to do so from the viewpoint of the world's most ancient continuing religion, Hinduism, and from India, the mother of spirituality. The first such precept, and perhaps the most fundamental, is to accept that there are multiple paths to the divine. Ekam sat vipraha bahuda vadanti. The truth is one, the wise call it by many names. It is prima facie the height of hubris to claim that any one religion holds the monopoly of truth. Had this been the divine will, we would not have had more than a dozen major religions with hundreds of sects flourishing around the world. Who are we, denizens of a tiny speck of dust in the infinite universe around us, to claim that the divine can appear only in this form and in this place and at this time? Stephen Hawking, probably the greatest living scientist, has said that there are at least 100 billion galaxies in the universe, each containing tens of millions of stars with their own planetary systems. If that be the case, then how can we know in what form and in what circumstances the illimitable divine has manifested itself elsewhere in the universe, and what levels of consciousness may have developed on other worlds? In the Hindu tradition, the universe itself is conceptualized as a manifestation of the divine, and Shiva Nataraja, whose image you saw in the film, as the supreme creator and dancer, whose eternal cosmic dance to celestial rhythms brings billions of galaxies into being, whose hands hold the promise of individual salvation, and in whose conflagration ultimately all manifestation perishes in the endless cycles of time. Be that as it may, my point is that it is unacceptable for any one religion to claim a monopoly of truth. I may proclaim that my religion is best, but that gives me no right to do violence to other religions, far less to attack and kill fellow human beings in the name of religion. The irony is that each religion considers its version of the divine to be benevolent and compassionate. I worship Lord Shiva, who is defined as Karuna Avataram, the embodiment of compassion. Muslims begin their prayer with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Allah the Merciful, the Beneficent. Christians believe that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, mounted the cross to atone for the sins of humanity. But despite these beliefs, the history of mankind from its very dawn has been scarred with interreligious conflicts that to this day cause distress and devastation around the world. Let us be clear, until there is harmony and understanding between religions, there will never be peace on earth. The interfaith movement, with which I have been closely involved for several decades, has been working towards bringing about this harmony. Beginning in 1893, with the first Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago, and coming down to the fifth Parliament in Melbourne last year, there has been over a century of interfaith activity around the world. I recall that here in Moscow, we gathered in 1990 to celebrate the 1000th anniversary of the advent of Christianity in this country. And there was an impressive interfaith gathering in the Kremlin, which was attended, among others, by Mikhail Gorbachev. Despite all these meetings, however, the interfaith movement seems to remain peripheral to human consciousness. And this needs deep thought and effective action from a gathering such as this. If we are to usher in a new spirituality through the medium, as was mentioned, of the International Transpersonal Association, its underpinning has to be the acceptance of the profound precept of multiple paths to the divine. We must also acknowledge that there may be millions who do not profess any religious belief at all, or at least rebel against any denominational or exclusivist doctrine. The second precept, which is particularly appropriate in global society, is that of the world as a family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, enunciated many thousands of years ago in India. It is only now, with the astounding breakthroughs in science and technology, that this has come within the realm of possibility. Instant communication has literally knit the world into a global community, and the internet has opened the gateways to human interaction, transcending barriers of space and time. However, here again we are up against a major problem. The Westphalian concept of fully sovereign nation states may have served a useful purpose in the evolution of human society over a period of time, but now when we are striving to move towards a seamlessly knit global society, this very concept seems to have become a hindrance. Even after the end of the Cold War, there have been dozens of localized conflicts which have claimed millions of lives and made refugees of many more millions around the world. In fact, in some areas, the nation states are now being transcended by regional associations, such as the European Union and ASEAN. And in such collectives, the states, while retaining their individuality, have synergized their strengths and built upon their limitations to bring into being more cohesive and effective communities. In my view, this is a positive path that opens new vistas with rich possibilities, so that nations need to seriously explore. Instead of 200 or so nation states, if we could move into a situation with about a dozen regional clusters, and those in turn could then develop into what has eloquently been described by the poet as the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World. The United Nations, as at present constituted, I'm afraid, is frozen in a time warp and has remained inflexible for more than 6 decades. As a result, with the Security Council's permanent members representing well under half of the world's population, it is incapable of articulating the aspirations of a large segment of people and reflecting the vastly changed political situation since 1945. Let it be remembered that the concept of the world as a family is not necessarily the same thing as the world as a market. The family is a supportive and humanizing social entity, whereas the market is often manipulative and exploitative in nature. If we really aspire for a sustainable world order, we will have to reorganize the global economy in a way that uplifts the 1/3 of the world's population living below the poverty line to a way of life where they receive at least the minimum inputs necessary for a decent human existence. Do you realize that even as I speak, there are millions of children who go without education? There are millions of people who shiver in the winter, who are drenched in the monsoon, who suffer in the summer. There are millions of children born with warped bodies and undeveloped minds because they do not get the nutritional inputs necessary for a really human existence. How can we call ourselves global citizens? How can we call ourselves a family of man if this sort of a situation continues? I have therefore based my vision of the new spirituality on these 3 precepts: the essential harmony of religions, the world as a family, and the imperative of eradicating poverty. Because in my view, without addressing these complex issues, any discourse on spirituality becomes an empty exercise. One of our great savants, Swami Vivekananda, used to say that preaching spirituality to someone who is starving is insulting him. Feed him first and then give him your religion. Accepting the premise of the world as a family also involves a radical shift in our attitude towards nurturing the planet. I had the privilege of being a member of the Indian delegation to the first United Nations Conference on the Human Environment held in Stockholm in 1972. Since then, there has been an exponential increase, both in public awareness regarding the hazards of environmental pollution, as also in the pollution itself, particularly carbon emissions, climate change, and the rising of oceans. In the Hindu view, we look upon the human race as part of nature, by no means enjoying dominion or the right to exploit and destroy the natural environment. The 63 verses of the hymn to the earth, the Bhumi Suktam in the Atharva Veda, written several thousand years ago, have an extraordinary articulation of ecological values and clearly portray the reverence in which the earth was held in those times and which we now have to rediscover. I will quote only 5 of these verses. Earth, in which lie the sea, the river, and the other waters, in which food and cornfields have come to be, in which live all that breathes and that moves, may she confer on us the finest of her yield. Earth, in which the waters, common to all, moving on all sides, flow unfailing day and night, may she pour upon us milk in many streams and endow us with luster. Pleasant be thy hills, O earth, thy snow-clad mountains and thy woods. On earth, brown, black, ruddy, and multicolored, the firm earth protected by Indra, on this earth I stand, unvanquished, unslain, and unhurt. May earth with people who speak various tongues and those who have various religious rites according to their places of abode, pour for me treasure in 1,000 streams, like a constant cow that never fails. Whatever I dig from the earth, may that have quick growth again. O purifier, may we not injure thy vitals or thy heart. This was a philosophy articulated thousands of years ago. And what have we done? We have injured their vitals and we have injured the heart. It is planet Earth, known as Gaia in the Greek tradition and Bhavani Sundara in the Hindu, that has nurtured consciousness, up from the slime of the primeval ocean to where we stand today? Will be converted into a burnt-out cinder circling the sun unto eternity? Or will we develop the wisdom and compassion, even at this late hour, to save it from destruction? Any talk of spirituality clearly has to include a renewed reverence for the earth and the creatures that inhabit it, whether it is the highly endangered tigers in Asia or the magnificent whales in the Pacific. In 1986, a meeting was held in the great cathedral of St. Francis of Assisi, in which representatives from various religions prepared declarations on man and nature. I had the privilege of writing the Hindu declaration. Reading those documents, one is struck by the commonality of views between various religious traditions regarding earth and the natural environment. Unfortunately, in our zeal for unplanned and reckless development, we have inflicted serious damage upon the earth in the last century. And unless there is a drastic reordering of our priorities, this will continue to escalate in the years and decades ahead. The horrific oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico that will cause calamitous damage to human, ocean, and plant life is a dramatic example of how our obsessive search for oil has ended up grievously wounding the planet. This is far removed from the spirituality we seek in the global society. We must now define what spirituality actually is. My definition would be that it is the attempt to access the deepest and highest power, whether we call it God, the Atman, the Buddha nature, or by any other name, and whether we consider it to be within our deeper selves or outside of it. This yearning for unity with the divine is the essential feature of spirituality. In a beautiful poem, Francis Thompson has the following lines: "Not where the wheeling systems darken, and our benumbed conceiving soars, the drift of pinions would we hearken, beats at our own clay-shuttered doors. The angels keep their ancient places, turn but a stone and start a wing. 'Tis ye, 'tis your estranged faces that miss the many-splendid thing." It is the quest for the many-splendid thing that represents the essence of spirituality, what the Bible calls the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world, what the Sufis call the Nur-e-Ruhani, what the Buddhists call the Bodhicitta, what the Hindu seer means when he exclaims, "I have seen that great being shining like 1,000 suns beyond the darkness." In every religious tradition, there is this transcendent and luminous dimension of spirituality, the belief that each human being embodies a spark of the divine, and that fanning it into the shining fire of spiritual realization is the highest meaning and purpose of our lives. In the Hindu tradition, there are 4 paths to bring about this union, or yoga, a word which comes from the same root as the English word yoke, and implies the ways of relating the divine within us and the all-pervasive divine without, God immanent with God transcendent, which inevitably involves altered levels of consciousness. The first is what we call the Jnana Yoga, or the way of wisdom. This is based largely on the teachings of the Upanishads, and in the West would be somewhat akin to the Platonic dialogues, the effort to cleanse and control the fluctuating mind so that it is able to discriminate between the eternal and the ephemeral. The second path is known as the Bhakti Yoga, the way of devotion. While the Jnana Yoga does not necessarily need an anthropomorphic form, in the Bhakti Yoga, which involves an overwhelming emotional relationship with the divine, such a form is considered necessary, whether it is Jesus Christ or Lord Shiva or a Bodhisattva or any other. In this category come great saints who have literally fallen in love with the divine. India has had numerous such saints, and in the West, there have been people like St. Francis of Assisi, St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross. In Islam, there are the glorious compositions, the Masnavi of Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, which he poured out in devotion to his spiritual guide, Shams-e Tabrizi. If the Jnana Yoga is the way of clarifying the mind and Bhakti Yoga the way of the heart, then the third major path is called the Karma Yoga, the way of dedicated works. It is a powerful means of spiritual growth as it involves dedication of whatever we do to our chosen form of the divine. Work done with this attitude of mind brings us closer to our goal of yoga. This is the path of good works, epitomized by Martha in the Bible, by Mother Teresa's Sister of Charity, by the Ramakrishna Mission, and other institutions dedicated to serving the poor, the needy, and those in pain. However, it must be remembered that in the Karma Yoga, these tasks must be undertaken in a spirit of devotion and dedication to the divine, and not only for doing good. The fourth path is the Raja Yoga, the royal path, and this involves the understanding of hidden powers within the human body that can be accessed through the process of Hatha Yoga. And this includes various physical and breathing exercises that in the West are generally referred to as yoga. It is believed that we can attain higher levels of consciousness with this type of yoga that brings us closer to the divine. The teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, Meister Eckhart, and other great Western mystics are of great value in this context, as they point to the possibility of the transformation of consciousness, as are the teachings of Carl Gustav Jung, leading finally to what Christians call the beatific vision, the Buddhist nirvana, and the Hindus Atma Darshan. I would like to dwell for a moment on Raja Yoga and its implications for the transmutation of consciousness. In the Hindu tradition, it is believed that there is a spiritual energy called the Kundalini, which resides coiled up like a serpent at the base of the spine. Under certain circumstances, and with special breathing and other exercises, this power can be aroused so that it moves up the spine. And as it does so, it energizes 7 chakras or plexuses from the base of the spine right up to the brain. The awakening of these chakras involves attaining new and newer levels of consciousness, until finally the power floods into the brain, thereby leading the practitioner to the bliss of illumination. The whole process, based upon Patanjali's classical Yoga Sutras, has been widely expanded in many significant texts down to the present day. The basic premise here is the same as the keynote of this conference, which is the consciousness revolution. Practicing Kundalini Yoga, of course, involves certain essential preliminary disciplines, without which the whole procedure is dangerous and could have negative reactions. In recent times, there have been several consciousness-altering procedures, including drugs. The whole of Carlos Castaneda's work, which I find to be most extraordinary, revolves around the spiritual teaching, beginning perhaps with the taking of psychedelic substances. Those who have taken LSD report encountering the most astonishing dimensions of consciousness, which are far beyond our normal mind. It is therefore clear that consciousness is not a static concept. It varies from species to species, from person to person, and within each individual from time to time. So it isn't as if we have a fixed consciousness. Consciousness is kinetic. The great evolutionary philosopher Sri Aurobindo has pointed out that there is no good reason to believe that evolution has concluded with the advent of normal human consciousness. He asserts that in the same way as life evolved from mineral, vegetable, and animal into the human dimension, the evolutionary process is bound to continue into the future. Man, in this view, is an intermediate creature, somewhere between the animal and the divine, a work in progress which needs careful attention. He holds that with the advent of man, for the first time there is a species on earth which is conscious of itself and therefore has the unique opportunity to cooperate with the forces of evolution and telescope what would otherwise take millions of years into a much shorter time span. He postulates many different levels of consciousness above the human. He speaks of the overmind and then the supermind, and his yoga revolves around an attempt to bring these forces down and fix them in the earth consciousness. The core of the transpersonal psychology movement has revolved around consciousness research. It is a matter of great pleasure that my good friend Dr. Stanislav Grof, who can justly be called the father of transpersonal psychology, is attending this conference along with his wife and collaborator, Christina. Consciousness research, mapping the brain, studying the mind-body relationship, drawing upon the rich material that comes to us in our dreams, are all means that help us in reaching a deeper understanding of our spiritual quest and represent the cutting edge of science, philosophy, and psychology. I have had the pleasure of attending several international transpersonal conferences in Mumbai, in Davos, in Kyoto, and in Prague. In each one, there was a lively and creative dialogue between practitioners as well as laity, between veterans like Stan and novices like myself, between scholars and gurus from around the world. Friends, it is indeed fitting that this conference is being held in Russia after the collapse of the restrictive and atheistic regime that ruled it for 70 years. Let me take you back half a century. In 1961, my wife, who regretfully passed away last year, and I visited the then Soviet Union as guests of Nikita Khrushchev, General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In the course of a small dinner that he gave for us in the Kremlin, I asked him whether it was possible to be a believer and also a member of the CPSU. He replied in the negative. He said that while they respected religious beliefs, to be a member of the CPSU, it was necessary to be an atheist, as that was a cardinal principle of Marxism-Leninism. It is indeed amazing that despite 3 generations under an atheistic regime, when Russia celebrated the 1000th anniversary of Christianity, there was a remarkable outpouring of religious fervor. All the churches came alive again, all the icons were repainted, and millions of people started going back to church. Another example of this phenomenon was Mongolia. The Marxist regime there broke the Buddhist temples, burnt the scriptures, killed and tortured the monks. Yet as soon as that regime was overthrown, there was an incredible craving for Buddhism. The Indian ambassador to Mongolia was Kushuk Bakola, the venerated head Lama of Ladakh, who almost single-handedly re-established Buddhism there. I was witness to this when I visited Ulaanbaatar to inaugurate a school for Buddhist priests that he had established. These examples show how deep-rooted the religious impulse is. However, there is a real danger of the pendulum swinging too far towards the other side, towards fanaticism, fundamentalism, and violence. What we need, therefore, and what spirituality can provide, is an approach that incorporates the best of our religious traditions without falling into the trap of dogmatism and exclusivist posturing. Mahatma Gandhi, who was deeply influenced among others by the great author Leo Tolstoy, preached throughout his life the path of non-violence, love, and compassion. When followed to their logical conclusion, these clearly represent a transformation of consciousness. Gandhiji's thought not only enthused millions of people in India in their struggle for freedom, but had worldwide ramifications, as with Nelson Mandela in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and Martin Luther King Jr. with the civil rights movement in the United States. Gandhi's famous saying, "An eye for an eye will make everyone blind," and "There is enough for everyone's need, but not enough for anyone's greed," have found profound implications for the global society which is emerging before our very eyes. Representing practical spirituality at its best, Gandhi remains an iconic figure for lovers of peace around the world. In this hour of crisis, humanity would be well advised to take heed of the wisdom represented by a frail man in a loincloth, whose conviction and faith shook the world and who finally fell to an assassin's bullet. International terrorism in the name of religion is one of the most tragic developments of recent times. Whatever may be the provocations and historic grievances, of which there are many, recourse to violence targeting innocent men, women, and children, as in terrorist attacks around the world from 9/11 in New York to 26/11 in Mumbai, are totally unacceptable. One of the main challenges that the new spirituality will have to face boldly is the growing nexus between criminal elements around the world, those based upon religious fundamentalism and fanaticism in particular. These represent the antithesis of spirituality, the shadow, as Jung would call it, which is being thrown by the glitter and glory of our technological civilization. The integration of the shadow is one of the most important challenges in post-Jungian psychology. And this is a matter upon which a gathering like this will have to ponder seriously. Transpersonal psychology provides an excellent methodology for steering our minds through the Scylla of nihilism and the Charybdis of fanaticism. It calls upon us to shed our prejudices and open ourselves to higher aspirations and powers. It is my sincere hope that this significant conference, which has brought together so many distinguished psychologists, scientists, and scholars from around the world, will provide a fresh impetus to the transpersonal psychology movement, and at the same time help in bridging religious and cultural differences between the great civilizations of the human race. Humanity has to break out of the dark valleys of conflict in the name of religion and strive towards the sunlit uplands of a new spirituality, a new paradigm of mutual understanding, wisdom, and compassion that will help us to build a refulgent global society. I am profoundly impressed by the breadth and depth of the program that our Russian hosts have meticulously organized for us here. It is a veritable feast of intellectual, psychological, and spiritual thought, in which outstanding teachers and practitioners from around the world will surely produce a unique synergy, for which I must warmly congratulate Vladimir Maykov and his team, who have labored for months to create this great event. I consider it a privilege to have been asked to inaugurate this important gathering, and I do so with an ancient Sanskrit verse that exhorts us to work together, to think together, to achieve together, and to eliminate every shred of hatred that may exist between us. Sahana vavatu, sahanau bhunaktu, sahaviryam karvavahi, tejasvinavadhitamastu, ma vidvishavahi. Om Shanti Shanti.
Дорогие друзья, мы все потрясены той речью, которой Каран Сингх открыл наш 17-й Всемирный трансперсональный конгресс. Доктор Каран Сингх, большое спасибо за это вступительное слово. И, конечно же, мы ищем духовность за пределами религиозных различий. И трансперсональная психология дает инструментарий для того, чтобы в том числе изучать это на путях научного познания. И в зале находится также профессор Виктор Петренко, который уже много лет создает семантическую карту мировых религий, которая позволяет нам на трансперсональном уровне понять основополагающее единство. Еще раз большое спасибо доктор Станислав Гроф и доктор Каран Сингх за прекрасное начало. Наша программа будет продолжаться в соответствии с расписанием, за исключением того факта, что обеденный перерыв сегодня будет немножко короче. И мы продолжим работу Конгресса в секциях, 8 секций, как в программе, в конференц-холле гостиницы «Альфа». Там 8 конференц-залов, они все пронумерованы, как в ваших программах, и начнутся секции. Очень интересные секции. А обед здесь предоставляет нам ресторан «Джаганат», индийская кухня, очень вкусная. И если кто желает, может пообедать у себя в гостиницах. Итак, мы увидимся здесь, в этом зале с вами снова в 19:00, в 7 часов вечера, и Алекс и Элисон Грей начнут свою мистерию преображения, за которым последует дискотека «Сияние космоса» с их картинами. Приятного аппетита! Желаю вам хорошо провести время. Спасибо.